St. Michael's Church was filled with white and gold flowers on that sunny October afternoon. It was the wedding everyone in Munich had been waiting to see. Maximilian Becker, 34, a successful architect with his own office in the heart of the city, was finally marrying Elena Hoffmann, 28, a radiant language teacher who had won not only Max's heart, but also the approval of his entire traditional Bavarian family. What no one knew was that in less than 2 weeks, one of them would be dead. Elena walked toward the altar with a smile that lit up the entire church. Her Italian lace dress had cost more than $8,000, a gift from her future father-in-law, Thomas Becker, owner of one of Bavaria's largest construction companies. The Becker family had spared no expense for their eldest son's wedding. After all, Max was the heir apparent to the real estate empire that Thomas had built over 3 decades. "You look absolutely stunning," Max whispered, when Elena reached the altar, his blue eyes shining with emotion. "I can't wait to start our life together in the Maldives." The Maldives. The dream destination Elena had casually mentioned during their engagement. "I've always dreamed of going somewhere where the water is so blue it looks unreal," she had said, with that slight foreign accent that Max found so charming. Elena was born in Ukraine, but moved to Germany at age 15 with her mother Katharina Hoffmann after her father's death. Father Johannes Graf conducted the ceremony with the solemnity typical of Bavarian Catholic tradition. When it came time for the vows, Elena held Max's hands with an intensity that some guests would later describe as almost desperate. "Max," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you saved me. You gave me a family, a home, a future. I promise I will always be your devoted wife, no matter what happens." The words were beautiful, but Marcel Frank, Max's best friend since childhood, noticed something strange in Elena's tone. There was an urgency there, an intensity that didn't match the expected joy of a bride. Marcel had known Max for over 20 years and had never seen him so in love. But something about Elena had always bothered him. Maybe it was the way she avoided talking about her past in Ukraine, or how she changed the subject whenever anyone asked about her life before she met Max. "I was being paranoid," Marcel would think later, "but my instincts were trying to warn me about something." The reception was a spectacular event at the Hotel Vier Jahreszeiten with over 200 guests. Elena circulated among the guests like a perfect hostess, conversing fluently in German, English, and Russian with Max's international colleagues. She had worked hard to learn everything about architecture over the past 2 years, impressing even the older partners at Max's firm with her knowledge. Katharina Hoffmann, Elena's mother, was visibly proud. "My daughter always knew she deserved the best," she told Patricia Albrecht, a long-time friend of the Becker family. "She worked very hard to get where she is today." Something in the way Katharina said it made Patricia frown. Worked hard how? Elena was a language teacher at a modest school, certainly not the career that would normally lead someone into München's higher social circles. But before Patricia could reflect on this further, Elena approached them with a big smile. "Frau Albrecht, I'm so glad you could come. Max always talks about how important you are to the Becker family." Elena had this incredible ability to make each person feel special, to remember details about everyone's lives. It was part of what had charmed Max from their first meeting 2 years earlier at a conference on sustainable architecture, where Elena was working as a freelance interpreter. While the guests celebrated, Max took Elena by the hand and led her to a more secluded corner of the hall. "Are you happy, mein Schatz?" he asked, using the affectionate nickname that always made her smile. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Elena replied, kissing him softly. "I can't wait for our honeymoon. It will be perfect. Just the two of us, away from everything and everyone." Away from everything and everyone. Later, those words would take on a sinister meaning that no one could have imagined in that moment of celebration. During the party, Eleanor received a call that caused her to discreetly slip away from the crowd. Marcel, who was near the bar, saw Eleanor answer the phone, and her expression changed completely. For a brief moment, her radiant smile disappeared, replaced by something Marcel could only describe as pure fear. Eleanor spoke quickly in Russian, her voice low but tense. Marcel didn't understand the language, but he recognized the tone of a heated argument. When Elena returned to the party a few minutes later, the smile had returned, but Marcel noticed that her hands were shaking slightly as she held her champagne glass. "Are you okay?" Max asked, concerned. "Sure, just my cousin from Kiev wanting to know about the wedding." Elena lied easily. "You know how dramatic family can be." But Marcel had noticed something Elena didn't know. He spoke basic Russian, the result of a construction project his engineering firm had developed in Estonia a few years earlier. And what he had heard had nothing to do with congratulations from a cousin. The words he managed to catch were money, time, and he can't know. As the evening progressed, Marcel watched Elena more closely. There were moments when she seemed genuinely happy, especially when she was around Max. But there were other moments when she thought no one was looking, when an expression of deep anxiety took over her face. "Maybe it's just wedding jitters," Marcel tried to convince himself. "After all, she's marrying into a wealthy and influential family. It's natural to be nervous." But something continued to bother him. Elena had appeared in Max's life very conveniently, at the exact moment when he was most vulnerable after the end of a long and painful relationship with his ex-fiancée, Sophia Weber. And now, less than 2 years later, she was marrying one of Munich's most eligible bachelors. It wasn't that Elena wasn't an incredible woman. She was intelligent, beautiful, loving. But there were gaps in her story, small inconsistencies that Marcel had noticed over the months. How did she know so much about expensive wines when she claimed to have grown up with few resources? Why were there never any photos of her as a teenager, only a few from her childhood and then as an adult in Germany? And why did her mother always change the subject when someone asked how they managed to immigrate to Germany? While Max and Elena cut the cake, Marcel made a decision that would change everything. He would discreetly investigate Elena's past during the couple's honeymoon, just to make sure his best friend was safe. If Marcel had known what he would discover, he would have acted that very night. At 11:30 p.m., Max and Elena made their triumphant exit from the party amid rose petals and applause. They would fly to the Maldives the next morning for 2 weeks at the Sonovajani resort, where an overwater villa awaited them with views of the endless ocean. "It will be the most romantic trip of our lives," Max whispered in Elena's ear as they stepped into the limousine. Elena smiled and nodded, but her fingers clenched her purse tightly enough to turn her knuckles white. Inside the purse, a phone vibrated silently with messages she could no longer ignore. Messages from someone who knew all her secrets. Someone who was waiting in the Maldives. Villa 47, over the crystal-clear waters of the Nunu Atoll, was even more spectacular than the photos. Max was ecstatic as the resort boat approached the wooden structure suspended over the turquoise ocean. "Elena, look at this. It's just like you dreamed." Elena smiled, but her eyes nervously scanned the horizon. During the entire 14-hour flight from Munich to Malé, she had obsessively checked her phone. The messages kept coming. "Did you arrive safely? Does he suspect anything? Remember the plan." Ahmed Rashid, the resort manager who greeted them, was a tall, elegant man with an impeccable British accent. "Mr. and Mrs. Becker, welcome to paradise. Your villa has everything you need for an unforgettable honeymoon." What Ahmed didn't mention was that he had received specific instructions about the German guests, instructions that came with a substantial payment to ensure complete privacy and report any unusual behavior. The villa was a dream. Master bedroom with glass floor over the ocean, private pool, deck for watching the sunset. Max was like a kid in a candy store, taking pictures of everything. "Elena, come here. Let's take our first photo as husband and wife in the Maldives." While Max was adjusting the camera, Elena received a message that made her pale. "Villa 23 midnight. Come alone or he pays the price." "Mein Schatz, are you okay? You look pale," Max observed, concerned. "Just tired from the trip," Elena lied, forcing a smile. "How about we have that welcome champagne?" That same night, while Max slept soundly after a romantic dinner on the private deck, Elena got up quietly. The clock read 11:45 p.m. She put on a robe and left the villa, walking along the wooden walkways that connected the accommodations over the water. Villa 23 was only 5 minutes away, but to Elena it felt like hours. Each step brought her closer to an encounter she had tried to avoid for months, but knew was inevitable. Dmitry Volkov was waiting for her on the deck of Villa 23, his imposing silhouette silhouetted against the moonlight. At 45, Dmitry was the kind of man who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. A former Russian intelligence officer, now a private security consultant, he had met Elena 3 years ago, under circumstances she would rather forget. "My dear Elena," he said in Russian, "or should I call you Frau Becker now?" His smile was as cold as the Siberian winter. "Dmitry, please, we made a deal. You said that if I married him, it would be the end." "Ah, yes, our agreement." Dmitry lit a cigarette, the momentary glow revealing his predatory eyes. "But circumstances have changed, Princess. Your former employers have found out about your little German fairy tale marriage. They are not happy." Elena felt the blood freeze in her veins. "I paid my debt. I did exactly what you asked in Kiev. The deal was that I would be free after that." "Freedom?" Dmitry chuckled softly. Elena, did you really think you could just disappear to Germany and start a new life? That you could marry a rich German and pretend your past didn't exist?" Over the next 20 minutes, Dmitry explained exactly what Elena would have to do. The plan was meticulous, cruel, and would leave Max completely vulnerable. Elena tried to argue, beg, negotiate, but Dmitry was adamant. "You have 48 hours to begin phase 1. If you don't, your dear husband will receive some very interesting documents about who you really are, and then, well, accidents happen on honeymoons." Munich, Germany, October 29th, 2023. While Elena was confronting her past in the Maldives, Marcel Frank was in his engineering office, using his professional contacts to discreetly investigate Elena's background. What began as a friend's curiosity turned into real concern. Klaus Weber, a private investigator Marcel had met during a construction fraud case, sat across the table with a grim expression. "Marcel, you're not going to like what I found out," Klaus said, opening a dossier. "Elena Hoffman exists, but only since 2018. Before that, there's no trace of her in Germany. Maybe she changed her name when she immigrated," Marcel suggested. "It's possible, but look at this." Klaus showed immigration documents. Elena and her mother entered Germany as refugees in 2018, claiming political persecution in Ukraine. But here's the strange part. They had significant financial resources. They bought an apartment in Schwabing for $400,000 in cash 6 months after arriving. Marcel frowned. Refugees with €500,000 in cash. Exactly, and there's more. Klaus turned the page. Elena worked as a freelance interpreter for 2 years, but her only registered clients were events related to construction and real estate. Always events where wealthy men from the industry would be present. The pattern was becoming clear and disturbing. Elena had strategically positioned herself to meet men like Max. The conference where they met was no coincidence. "Klaus, I need you to check something else. I want to know if Elena had any other serious relationships in Germany before Max." Klaus nodded. I'm already looking into that. But Marcel, there's something else you need to know. He hesitated. The references Elena provided when she applied to teach, 2 of them are from people who don't exist. Sonevajani Resort, Maldives, October 30th, 2023. Max woke up on the second morning of their honeymoon noticing that Elena was acting strange. She had insisted on having breakfast in their room instead of going to the restaurant, and she kept checking her phone obsessively. Elena, we're on our honeymoon. How about we put our phones away today? You're right, she said. But Max noticed that she hid the device instead of turning it off. How about we go snorkeling? During the boat ride to the coral reef, Eleanor seemed distant. She made all the right moves, smiling, taking pictures, commenting on the beauty of the place, but Max felt that her mind was elsewhere. Elena, are you sure everything is okay? You seem worried about something. Eleanor cupped Max's face in her hands. For a moment, her eyes filled with genuine tears. Max, I love you. You know that, right? No matter what happens, remember that I love you. The intensity of the statement confused Max. Of course I know. Elena, you're scaring me. What's going on? Nothing, she replied quickly. Sometimes I'm afraid that all this happiness is too good to be true. That evening, as they dined at the resort restaurant, Max couldn't help but notice that Elena kept checking the restaurant entrance, as if she were waiting for someone. When the waiter, Ibrahim, approached to serve the wine, Elena became visibly tense. Is there a problem with the service? Max asked. No, of course not. Ibrahim is very attentive. What Max didn't know was that Ibrahim had just discreetly handed Elena a note that simply said, tomorrow, his villa, during the dive, don't fail. Elena folded the paper and hid it, but her hands were shaking. The deadline was running out, and she still hadn't found the courage to execute the first phase of Dimitri's plan. A plan that would begin with her faking a medical emergency to leave Max alone and vulnerable in Villa 47. While Max talked excitedly about the tropical fish they had seen during the dive, Elena mentally calculated how long it would take for the pills Dimitri had given her to take effect. Pills that, according to him, would only leave Max unconscious for a few hours so she could access his bank accounts without resistance. Elena wanted to believe that was all it was, but she had known Dimitri long enough to know that he never left witnesses alive. Elena was in the bathroom of Villa 47, holding the small bottle Dimitri had given her. The 2 white pills looked harmless, but she knew they represented the dividing line between her previous life and a future from which there would be no return. Elena, is everything okay there? Max's concerned voice came from the bedroom. Yes, just getting ready for dinner, she replied, trying to control the tremor in her voice. Max had planned a special evening, dinner on the villa's private beach under the stars. He had even asked Chef Ahmed to prepare Elena's favorite dish, shrimp risotto with Dom Perignon 2010 champagne. It will be perfect, Max had said, beaming. Our 3rd night as a married couple in paradise. Elena crushed the pills with the handle of a toothbrush, her hands shaking so much that she almost dropped the powder. It will just knock him out, she repeated Dimitri's words in her mind. Then we can access his accounts and transfer the money. He won't remember anything. But Elena knew men like Dimitri. She knew that he won't remember anything could have a much more permanent meaning. The phone vibrated. 1 hour. Don't fail, or he dies anyway. Munich, Germany, 3:30 p.m. local time. Marcel Frank was in the office of Klaus Weber, the private investigator, with a look of growing horror as he reviewed new documents. Marcel, you need to call Max immediately, Klaus said, his voice tense. What I've discovered is much worse than we imagined. Klaus spread photographs and documents across the table. Eleanor Hoffman is not a political refugee. She is a professional honeypot, a woman trained to seduce wealthy men and extract information or money from them. What are you saying? I discovered that she had at least 3 serious relationships with wealthy German men between 2018 and 2021. Friedrich Müller, a businessman from Stuttgart, lost $200,000 in an investment she suggested before disappearing. Wolfgang Schmidt, owner of a hotel chain, died in a car accident a week after changing his will in her favor. Marcel felt his blood run cold. And the third. Bernd Hoffmann, 58, widower, owner of 3 factories in the Rhineland, found dead in his apartment in Düsseldorf in September 2021. Official cause, heart attack. Unofficial, there were traces of digitoxin in his blood. Digitoxin, heart poison. It kills by mimicking a natural heart attack. Klaus paused. Elena disappeared from Düsseldorf the day after his death. 3 months later, she showed up in Munich and met Max. Marcel pulled out his phone with trembling hands. What time is it in the Maldives right now? 11:30 p.m. Marcel, if my theory is correct, Max is in mortal danger right now. Villa 47, Sonneva Gianni Resort, 11:45 p.m. The dinner was perfect. Floating candles in the private pool, soft music in the background, the full moon reflecting on the ocean. Max was ecstatic, photographing every moment. Elena, this is magical. Thank you for suggesting the Maldives. It's exactly as you dreamed. Elena forced a smile as she poured the champagne. The powder was dissolved in Max's glass. Invisible, odorless, lethal, if Dmitri was lying about the dosage. Max, she said, her voice breaking, I want you to know that these have been the happiest days of my life. You made me feel like a normal person, a good person. Max frowned. Elena, you're talking as if this is goodbye. What's going on? Before she could answer, Max's phone began to ring insistently. Marcel. Elena felt panic. If Max answered now before drinking the champagne. Don't answer it, she said quickly. It's our honeymoon. We can talk to Marcel tomorrow. Max hesitated, but the phone kept ringing. It must be important. Marcel wouldn't call unless it was urgent. Please, Elena grabbed Max's arm, just take a sip first, a toast to our first days of marriage. There was something desperate in her voice that made Max pause. He looked at the champagne glass, then at Elena, noticing for the first time the tears in her eyes. Elena, you're crying. What's wrong? The phone stopped ringing, then started again immediately. Answer it, Elena said suddenly, as if she had made a decision. Answer the call. Max picked up the phone. Marcel, what? Max, don't drink or eat anything Elena has prepared. She's a professional killer. She's trying to kill you. Elena saw the shock spread across Max's face as he processed Marcel's words. Slowly, he lowered the phone and looked at the champagne glass, then at Elena. Is it true? His voice was a whisper. Elena couldn't lie. Not to Max. Not to the only man she had ever truly loved. Yes, she whispered back. Max dropped the glass. Champagne spilled across the wooden deck like a golden stain of betrayal. At that moment, flashlight beams appeared on the walkway. Dmitri approached with 2 large men, their silhouettes menacing against the moonlight. Elena did her part, Dmitri said in English, his voice laden with false kindness. But I'm afraid the plans have changed, Herr Becker. Max backed away, looking for an escape route. But he was in a villa on the water. There was nowhere to run. The problem with professional wives, Dmitri continued, is that sometimes they develop real feelings. Elena here has become attached. Elena stepped between Max and Dmitri. You said it would just be money. You promised you wouldn't hurt him if I cooperated. "Ah, my dear, did you really believe that?" Dmitri laughed. "Your husband saw my face. You told him about our operation. He spoke to people in Germany. I can't allow that information to spread." Dmitri signaled to his men. One of them pulled out a pistol with a silencer. "Wait," Elena cried. "I can still be useful. I can get access to his accounts. I can—" "Elena," Dmitri interrupted gently, "you've become a liability, just like your husband." Max, who had remained in silent shock, finally found his voice. "Why? Why did she do it?" Dmitri looked at Elena with cruel amusement. "Tell him, princess. Tell him about Kiev. Tell him about your debt." Elena closed her eyes, tears falling freely now. "My father didn't die of natural causes in Ukraine. He owed a lot of money to dangerous people. When he couldn't pay, they killed him and said my mother and I would pay the debt." In other ways. Max felt like he was in a nightmare. "How many? How many men did you kill?" "3, she whispered. "And you would have been the 4th. But Max, everything changed when I truly fell in love with you. I couldn't." "How touching," said Dmitri. "Unfortunately, love doesn't pay debts." The man with the pistol took a step forward. At that moment, powerful lights illuminated the villa. Voices shouted in English, "Police! Drop your weapons!" Elena looked at Max, confused. "How did the police—" Max pulled a small device from his pocket, a GPS tracker that Marcel had insisted he take, just in case. "Marcel wasn't just calling to warn me," Max said, his voice shaky but determined. "He was tracking my location and calling for help." Dmitri growled angrily and made a desperate signal to his men. Villa 47 was about to become a battlefield. The world exploded into chaos. The lights of the Maldivian police helicopters turned night into artificial day, while special commandos rappelled down ropes into the surrounding villas. Inspector Hassan Malik, commanding the operation from the police boat, shouted orders through a megaphone in English and Divehai. "Dmitri Volkov, you are surrounded. Drop your weapons." Dmitri growled a string of Russian expletives and signaled to his men. Victor and Sergei, 2 former soldiers he had brought with him from Montenegro, took up strategic positions, one on the main deck, the other at the villa entrance. "Elena!" Dmitri shouted over the noise of the helicopters. "You did this! You brought them here!" "I didn't know anything!" Elena shouted back, but her mind was racing. Marcel had called the police, but how had they gotten here so fast? How did they know exactly where to find Dmitri? Max, still in shock, whispered to Elena. "The tracker. Marcel gave me a special GPS tracker. He said it was in case I got lost while diving, but—" Elena understood immediately. Marcel hadn't trusted her from the beginning. The seemingly innocent wedding gift was actually a military tracking device that allowed the police to locate Max in real time. "Clever," she murmured, with a mixture of admiration and regret. Victor began firing at the police boats, the sound of the shots muffled by the silencer, but still audible. The bullets ricocheted off the water, creating small explosions that momentarily lit up the dark ocean. "Hold your positions!" Inspector Malik shouted. "We have civilians in the village!" Dmitri pulled Elena by the arm with brutal force. "You're going to help me get out of here, or I'll kill your precious German husband right in front of you." "Elena, no!" Max shouted, trying to move toward her, but Sergei pointed the gun at his chest. Elena looked at Max, then at Dmitri. In her eyes was a cold, determined resolve that Max had never seen before. This was no longer the gentle, submissive language teacher. This was the woman who had survived the streets of Kiev, who had killed 3 men to protect her mother. "Dmitri," she said calmly, "you've forgotten one important thing." "What?" Elena smiled, and there was something predatory about that smile. "I never said I was working alone." At that moment, the lights in the villa went out completely. In total darkness, Three things happened simultaneously. Ahmed Rashid, the resort manager who had welcomed them, emerged from the shadows behind Victor. He wasn't just a hotel employee. He was an undercover agent for the BKA, Bundeskriminalamt, the German federal police, who had been monitoring Elena for months. Ibrahim, the attentive waiter, proved to be Captain Ibrahim al-Mansouri of the United Arab Emirates Special Forces on a joint international mission to dismantle Dimitri's network. And Elena, in a move that shocked everyone, pulled a small gun from the inside of her thigh, hidden there since the first day of their honeymoon. "Did you really think I would come here unarmed?" she said to Dimitri, her voice cold as ice. "After everything you put me through?" The ensuing shootout lasted only 47 seconds, but it seemed like an eternity. Victor was neutralized by Ahmed with a well-aimed shot to the shoulder. Sergei tried to use Max as a human shield, but Ibrahim appeared from the blind side and knocked him down with a blow that left the Russian unconscious. Dimitri, realizing he was surrounded, made one last desperate move. He pulled a fragmentation grenade from his belt. "If I can't have the money," he shouted, "no one will live to tell the tale." "Grenade!" shouted Ahmed, pushing Max behind the villa's massive wooden structure. Elena was too close to Dimitri to run away. Instead, she did something no one expected. She grabbed his arm, preventing him from pulling the grenade's pin. "Elena, what are you doing?" Max shouted from behind cover. "Making sure this ends," she replied, wrestling with Dimitri for control of the grenade. "Max, I need you to know everything I felt for you was real. Every word, every moment." Dimitri, physically stronger, began to win the fight. The grenade's pin was gradually coming loose. "Elena, let go!" Ahmed shouted, preparing to shoot, but he couldn't risk hitting the grenade or Elena. "I can't," she yelled back. "If I let go, it'll kill everyone." That's when Max did something that surprised even Elena. Instead of staying in the shelter, he ran toward the fight, diving into the villa's private pool. "Max, no!" Elena screamed. But Max had noticed something the others hadn't. The villa was built on stilts that extended 4 meters into the water. If the grenade exploded there, the structure might collapse, but the water would absorb some of the impact. "Elena, pull him into the pool. Now!" Elena understood immediately. Using all her strength, she managed to push Dimitri toward the pool, still holding tightly onto his grenade arm. "You're smarter than I thought," Dimitri growled, "but not smart enough." He had a second weapon, and it was pointed directly at Elena's heart. "Bye, princess." The shot echoed over the water. Elena felt the impact, but not where she expected. Max had emerged from the pool at that very moment, placing himself between her and Dimitri. "Neen!" Elena screamed, watching Max double over in pain, blood spreading across his white shirt. The rage that consumed Elena in that moment was primitive and lethal. This was the woman who had survived the worst parts of Kiev, the woman who had killed to protect those she loved. With one fluid motion, she pulled out her own gun and fired 3 times. Dimitri fell backward, the grenade rolling across the deck toward the water. Ahmed dove behind the grenade, managing to kick it into the ocean a split second before the explosion. The underwater detonation created a column of water that rose 10 meters into the air, drenching the entire villa. When the spray of water subsided, Elena was kneeling beside Max, pressing her hands against the wound in his shoulder. "Max, stay with me. Look at me." "Elena," he whispered, "I trust you. I always have." "Don't talk like that," she said, tears mixed with salt water streaming down her face. "You're going to be okay. We're going to be okay." Ahmed was talking rapidly into the radio, requesting an urgent medical helicopter. Ibrahim was checking to see if Dimitri was still alive. He wasn't. "Elena," Max murmured, "who are you, really?" Elena looked at him, then at Ahmed and Ibrahim, who were clearly waiting for her answer. "My real name is Yelena Volkov. she said softly. Dmitri was my older half-brother, and 5 years ago when he killed our father over a gambling debt, I swore that one day I would make him pay. Max blinked, processing this information. So, all of this was revenge? It was, she admitted, until I fell truly in love with you. Then everything changed. Ahmed approached. Elena, or rather Yelena, you've been cooperating with us for over a year. It's time to finish the job. Elena nodded, taking Dmitri's phone. Her fingers flew across the screens, accessing bank accounts and files that would reveal the entire international network of honeypots and murders. Here are the names, she said, handing the phone to Ahmed. All the women he forced to do what I did, all the men who were killed, all the accounts where the money was laundered. The sound of the medical helicopter approaching echoed over the water. What about Elena? Max asked weakly but determinedly. What happens to us now? Max awoke to the sound of medical machines and voices speaking English in the hallway. His left shoulder was immobilized, but he was alive. That was more than he had expected a few hours earlier. How are you feeling, Herr Becker? Asked Dr. Amira Hassan, the surgeon who had operated to remove the bullet fragments. Like I've been hit by a truck, Max muttered, trying to sit up. Elena? Where's Elena? Your wife is being questioned by German agents. She's physically fine, but... The doctor hesitated. The situation is complicated. Through the hospital window, Max could see journalists gathering. The story had already leaked. German honeymoon ends in international shootout. Assassination network dismantled in the Maldives. Marcel Frank appeared at the door, looking like he had aged 10 years in the last 24 hours. Max, my God, when I got the call. Marcel. Max tried to smile. You saved my life. No, you saved your own life. And Elena's too. Marcel pulled up a chair. Max, there are things you need to know about what happened, about who Elena really is. Malay Police Station, Interrogation Room 3, 8:15 a.m. Elena, or Yelena Volkov as she now identified herself, sat across a table from 3 investigators, Ahmed Rashid, German BKA, Captain Ibrahim Al-Mansouri, UAE Special Forces, and Inspector Hassan Malik, Maldives Police. Let's start at the beginning, Ahmed said in German, turning on the recorder. Your real name, age, and how you became involved with Dmitri Volkov's organization. Yelena took a deep breath. My name is Yelena Dmitrievna Volkov. I'm 28 years old. Dmitri was my older half-brother, the son of my father's first marriage to a Russian woman. I grew up in Kiev with my mother, Katerina Volkov. Continue. In 2018, my father, Viktor Volkov, accumulated enormous gambling debts with the Russian mafia in Kiev. When he couldn't pay, they killed him in front of us, in front of my mother and me. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Dmitri showed up at the funeral and said the debt was now our responsibility. Ahmed took notes. How much? 500,000 euros. For a school teacher and a university student in Kiev, it might as well have been 500 million. How did Dmitri propose you pay it off? Yelena closed her eyes. He said I was young and pretty, that rich German men were easy targets for Eastern European women. The plan was simple: seduce, marry, steal, eliminate. Ibrahim leaned forward. And you agreed? My mother had cancer. We needed money for treatment. And Dmitri made it clear that if I didn't cooperate, he would kill us anyway. Yelena looked directly at Ahmed. So yes, I agreed. Tell us about your victims. Yelena listed them methodically. Friedrich Müller, Stuttgart, 2019, $200,000 stolen through fake investment. Wolfgang Schmidt, Frankfurt, 2020, killed in a car accident after changing his will. Bernd Hoffmann, Düsseldorf, 2021, poisoned with digitoxin after transferring $350,000. And then you met Max Becker. Yes, at the architecture conference in Munich, March 2022. For the first time, her voice softened. Dmitry had researched the Becker family. Max's father was worth over $10 million. Max would be the final grand prize. But something changed. Everything changed. Yelena looked out the window. Max was different, kind, genuine. For the first time in my life, someone looked at me as if I were worth something, not as a tool. Ahmed consulted his notes. When did you decide to turn against Dmitry? 6 months after meeting Max. I realized I was truly in love. And more importantly, I discovered that Dmitry had lied about my father's debt. How so? I spoke with Alexei Petrov, one of my father's original creditors in Kiev. The debt had been paid off with the sale of our house. Dmitry made it all up to control me. Anger flashed in her eyes. He killed my father for fun, not for money. Is that when you contacted the BKA? Not immediately. First I tried to slip away quietly, but Dmitry wouldn't allow it. He said that if I didn't marry Max and carry out the final plan, he would kill my mother. Yelena paused. That's when I went to the German embassy in Kiev. Ibrahim asked a crucial question. How many other women were being forced to do the same? Yelena pulled Dmitry's phone from the table. Based on the contacts and conversations I was able to access, at least 15 women active across Europe, Germany, France, Austria, Switzerland, all with stories similar to mine. Ahmed felt his stomach churn. 15 women kidnapping and killing wealthy men simultaneously? Dmitry's operation was much bigger than you realized. He had contracts with several criminal organizations. It wasn't just greed, it was a systematic business. Malay Regional Hospital, 10:45 a.m. Max was watching the news when Marcel returned with Thomas Becker, his father, who had flown overnight from Munich to the Maldives. Max, Thomas said, hugging his son carefully so as not to hurt his injured shoulder. Wie geht es dir, mein Sohn? Physically fine, emotionally? Max looked at Marcel. Did you tell him everything? Just the basics, that Elena was being blackmailed and that you were in danger. Thomas sat down heavily. Max, this woman, she killed 3 men before you. I know, Papa. Max sighed. But she also saved me. If she really wanted to kill me, I'd have been dead days ago. But she would have drugged you. She had poison. And at the last moment, she couldn't do it. She chose to protect me even though she knew it would put her in danger. Marcel interjected. Max, there's something else you need to know. The German agents want to talk to you about testifying against Dmitry's network. Yelena, she's cooperating fully, but she could still face murder charges. Max tried to get up. Where is she? I need to talk to her. Max, don't be an idiot, Thomas exploded. This woman is a professional killer. She lied about everything. Not everything, Max said firmly. She didn't lie about loving me. I saw it in her eyes when she put herself between me and the bullet. People don't do that for lies. Before anyone could respond, Ahmed Rashid appeared in the doorway. Herr Becker, can we talk? There are some things about your wife that may change your perspective on this whole situation. Thomas muttered, It can only get worse. Ahmed looked at Thomas, then at Max. Actually, Herr Becker Sr., it can get significantly better. Malay Police Station, 12:30 p.m. Yelena was finishing providing passwords and access codes for Dmitry's bank accounts when Max entered the interrogation room in a wheelchair, pushed by Marcel. Max, she whispered, tears immediately welling up in her eyes. You should be in the hospital. I need to hear it from you, Max said, ignoring Marcel's hands, trying to stop him. I need to know what was real. Yelena looked at Ahmed, who nodded permissively. My real name is Yelena. My mother really does have cancer. She's being treated at a private clinic in Kiev that I pay for, with money stolen from dead men. She paused. I really did kill 3 people, and I really was planning to drug you on the first night. Max nodded, processing. What about the rest? Every "I love you" was true. Every moment we spent together where I wasn't pretending to be someone I'm not. Every time you made me laugh or feel safe. Yelena leaned forward. Max, I never knew what love was until you. That doesn't justify what I did, but it was real. Max was silent for a long moment. Finally, what happens now? Ahmed replied, Yelena cooperated with us over a year ago. She provided evidence that allowed us to dismantle an international murder network. 15 women were freed. Dozens of future victims were saved. And legally? That depends on many factors. And one very important question. Ahmed looked between Max and Yelena. Herr Becker, do you still consider Yelena your wife? Because under German and international law, that significantly changes your legal options. Max looked at Yelena, who was clearly prepared for him to say no. Yes, he said simply, she is my wife, and I will fight for her. The room was packed with journalists as Judge Dr. Andrea Zimmermann read the final sentence in the case that had captivated Germany for months. The state versus Yelena Dmitrievna Volkov-Becker. Max sat in the front row, still wearing a discreet sling. His shoulder had never fully regained its mobility, a permanent reminder of that night in the Maldives. At his side sat Marcel Frank, and surprisingly, Thomas Becker, who had completely changed his opinion of Yelena during the 5 months of legal proceedings. Considering the defendant's extraordinary cooperation with international authorities, the judge declared, which resulted in the dismantling of a criminal network responsible for at least 23 murders in 7 countries, and taking into account her status as a victim of coercion, this court sentences Yelena Volkov-Becker to 5 years in prison with supervised probation. A murmur rippled through the room. Effectively, Yelena would not be going to prison. Additionally, the judge continued, the defendant will perform 500 hours of community service working with victims of human trafficking and will cooperate indefinitely with international authorities in identifying other similar networks. Yelena, wearing a simple navy blue suit, remained impassive as she listened to the translation. But Max saw her hands trembling slightly. Prosecutor Klaus Richter had argued for actual imprisonment, but the defense led by Dr. Sophia Weber, ironically Max's ex-fiancée, who now worked as a criminal lawyer, had built a compelling case on coercion and cooperation. Justice isn't always perfect, Sophia had argued, but sometimes recognizing human complexity is more important than blind punishment. Café Schönbrunn, Munich, March 17, 2024. 2 days after the sentencing, Max and Yelena sat quietly in an inconspicuous café, away from the cameras that still occasionally followed them. It was the first time they had been truly alone since the Maldives. How do you feel? Max asked, absent-mindedly stirring his coffee. Grateful, confused, guilty? Yelena looked at her hands. Max, you don't have to do this. You don't have to stay with me out of obligation or pity. Max interrupted her gently. Yelena, over the past 5 months, you've had dozens of opportunities to lie, to manipulate me, to get a lighter sentence. You could have feigned remorse or made up excuses. Instead, you told the truth about everything, even the parts that made you look worse. That doesn't erase what I did. No, it doesn't, but it shows who you really are. Max took her hand. The woman I fell in love with is still here. She just carries more baggage than I realized. Yelena laughed sadly. Baggage is a gentle way to describe 3 murders. 3 men you killed to save your mother, to survive. Max paused. Yelena, I grew up in a wealthy, privileged family. I've never faced impossible choices. I won't judge decisions you made in a world I can't even imagine. Becker Family Villa, Starnberg, March 20th, 2024. Thomas Becker was in his home office, on the phone with Marcel Frank, when Max and Yelena arrived for the Sunday dinner that had become a tense but important tradition. "Marcel, are the donations working?" Thomas asked as he waved to the couple. Marcel was coordinating the Volkov-Becker Foundation for victims of trafficking, created with some of the money recovered from Dimitri's accounts. Thomas had insisted on funding the foundation after hearing the stories of the other 15 women Yelena had helped free. "We've managed to repatriate 11 of the women to their home countries," Marcel reported. 4 have chosen to stay in Germany under witness protection. All are receiving psychological and financial support. Thomas hung up and turned to Yelena. "How's your mother?" "Better," Yelena replied, touched that he always asked. "The treatment in Kiev is working. The doctors are optimistic." Katerina Volkov had finally met Thomas via video call the week before. The conversation in Russian with simultaneous translation had been emotional, but Thomas had been impressed by the dignity of the elderly woman who had raised a daughter under impossible circumstances. "I brought something for you," Thomas said, handing Yelena an envelope. Inside was a new German passport and an official document. Yelena Volkov-Becker was now officially a German citizen. "Thomas," she began, moved. "You're part of this family now," he said firmly. "For better or for worse. Max and Yelena's apartment, Schwabing, May 2024. They had moved to a smaller, more discreet apartment, away from the neighborhood where Max had grown up. The process of rebuilding trust was slow and sometimes painful. Yelena was in therapy twice a week with Dr. Maria Santos, a specialist in trauma and reintegration. Max had started therapy too. Finding out that his wife was a killer, even under the circumstances, had left its own psychological scars. "Some days are harder than others," Yelena admitted to Max one night after a particularly intense nightmare about Dimitri. "I know," Max said, hugging her. "But every day you wake up and choose to be better. That's what matters." They had established strict rules, complete transparency, mandatory therapy, and Yelena reported monthly to Ahmed Rashid, now based in München, as an expert on international trafficking networks. "Max," Yelena said one night, "do you ever regret it, fighting for me?" Max thought carefully before answering. "I regret not realizing you were in danger sooner. I regret that you had to go through all of this alone for so long. But regret loving you? Never." 6 months later, October 2024. Munich Airport, international departures gate. Max and Yelena were at the airport, but this time traveling together to Kiev. It was Yelena's first time returning to Ukraine since she fled in 2018. "Nervous?" Max asked, noticing her hands shaking as she held her ticket. "Terrified," she admitted. "But my mother wants to meet the man who, as she puts it, brought my daughter back to life." Marcel showed up to say goodbye, carrying flowers for Katerina. "How's the foundation?" Yelena asked. "We saved 7 more women last month," Marcel replied proudly. "Your information about the network in Prague was crucial." Yelena nodded. Part of her reintegration involved actively working to dismantle other similar networks. It was dangerous, but she insisted it was her responsibility. "Marcel," Max said, "thank you for everything, for trusting your instincts, for not giving up, and for being my best friend." Marcel interrupted him. "That's what friends do." Epilogue. Kiev, Ukraine, October 25th, 2024. The small house where Katerina Volkov was recovering was located in a quiet neighborhood in Kiev. When she opened the door and saw Max for the first time, her tears came immediately. "Spasibo," she whispered in Russian, hugging Max. "Thank you for saving my daughter." "Actually," Max replied in his basic Russian that he had been practicing, "she saved me." During dinner, Max watched Yelena chatting animatedly with her mother in her native language. For the first time in months, she seemed completely relaxed. The weight of years of secrets had finally been lifted. "Max," Katerina said in careful English, "you know my daughter still has nightmares." I know, he replied, and you know she may never be completely like other wives? I know that too. Katharina nodded approvingly. Dann sind Sie der richtige Mann für sie. Then you are the right man for her. That night, in the modest hotel where they were staying, Yelena turned to Max in bed. Do you regret anything about our honeymoon? Max laughed, the first time they had been able to joke about what had happened. Well, the food was excellent, the view was spectacular, the room service was explosive. Yelena slapped his arm, laughing too. You idiot. But seriously, Max said, becoming serious again, I don't regret anything. Not even the bad parts, because they all brought us here. Where is here? Here is us, for real this time. No secrets, no lies, no people trying to kill us. Max paused. Just us, figuring out how to be normal. Normal is overrated, Yelena murmured, snuggling up against him. Through the hotel window, the lights of Kiev shone in the darkness, a city that had witnessed both suffering and hope, much like their relationship. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was still therapy ahead, occasional legal challenges, and the constant work of rebuilding trust. But it was real, and sometimes real is better than perfect. End. A few years later, Max and Yelena Becker would establish the most successful anti-trafficking foundation in Europe. Yelena would become an international consultant on identifying criminal networks, and Max would design rehabilitation centers in 6 countries. They never had a second honeymoon, but they never needed one. The first, after all, had been memorable enough,